Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 to 35 tells us the parable of the unforgiving servant. In light of Jesus' teaching on sin in the church immediately preceding this, in verse 15 to 20, Peter asked Jesus about the extent of forgiveness. But the problem with Peter's question is that what he wanted to make a rule of forgiveness by asking Jesus what the maximum number of times he was required to forgive someone was. He missed the point of grace. As Jesus said, we're always to forgive. He echoes this again in Luke 17. Even if that person wrongs you 7 times a day and each time turns again and asks for forgiveness, you must forgive. See, when we understand that we've been forgiven, we're not tempted to keep a spreadsheet documenting all the times we've forgiven others. As we look into this parable, we're going to compare and contrast the two servants. First, the servant who owed the king. He owed the king such a vast amount that even in his whole lifetime, he would be unable to pay it back. No matter how patient the king might have been, he would not have seen the debt repaid in full. In contrast, his fellow servant owes an amount that with some time was actually possible to repay, maybe a few months of earnings, which isn't a small amount, except when contrasted with the size of the debt that the servant owed the king. See, this servant deserved to have everything he owned, along with his family, sold to repay the debt. But the servant fell to their knees and begged, and we see that the king took pity and had compassion on him, cancelled the debt, and let him go. In contrast, that very same servant, with the one who owed him, grabbed him and choked him and threw him in prison. The debtor also fell to their knees and begged in the same way that the servant had done with the king. See, this servant knew in his heart what it was to be a debtor brought before the one that they owe. He had experienced for himself the tenderness of mercy and the freedom of being released from his debt, not just for him, but for his family as well. And yet when faced with the one who owed him, instead of giving out of the same heart that he had received, there was no compassion. He was merciless. Although the king released him from the penalty he deserved as a debtor, he did not release him from his duty as a servant. The king expected him to deal with his fellow servant just as the king had dealt with him. See, we're to understand the size of our debt that Jesus has forgiven. The servant that had nothing to pay with believed that he could pay it all. He was convinced of his debt, but he was not humbled at the size of it. In the same way, our debt of sin is so great that we're not able to pay it. We're sinners that are bankrupt debtors. Silver and gold won't pay our debt. Sacrifice and offering won't do it. Our good works are but God's work in us. My prayer today is that we will take time to reflect on the mercy, compassion, and forgiveness that we've been given through Christ. That we would understand the enormity of the debt that has been paid on our behalf, and that we wouldn't take for granted the freedom we are therefore able to walk in, but that our heart would be humbled all the more. From a reading we've done previously in Matthew 6, in the Lord's Prayer, we see the scripture read, "And forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors." Forgiven people forgive. When we're aware of our need for forgiveness, we more easily give it. As receivers of extraordinary mercy, we're to be dispensers of enormous grace. It's easy enough to appear as if we've reconciled through our words, but what God requires of us is to forgive from the heart. When we truly forgive from our heart, we are able to desire and seek the welfare of those who have caused offence. We hold no judgment, no ill will, no desire to get justice. It is as though no offence had ever occurred. To forgive in this way isn't always easy. Most often, it's the belief that the person owes us something that can hold us back from forgiving someone from our heart. Think for a moment how it might feel if you received a call to say that the bank had decided to cancel your debt. You no longer needed to pay your mortgage. As far as they're concerned, it's as if you never even had the loan. It's gone. Whoa, what a weight lifted off. How light would your steps feel that day? We stand before God, forgiven. We walk each day in the lightness of freedom. how much more should we release others to experience the same? My prayer today is that we wouldn't just read this passage, but truly hear it and allow it to examine our hearts, to change, renew, transform our thinking and attitudes of our heart, that the things we believe we're owed by others, we choose in our heart to forgive as if the offence never existed at all. That we would be able to treat one another with the same infinite love, compassion, and grace that we have first experienced ourselves.